we created the second template with Create ScandiPWA app, which is provided in the newer versions of Scandi. It's a great tool and it makes creating new theme a breeze, so we recommend it highly. Hi everyone, my name is Michal Staniul. I'm head of project management at Advox Studio, and I'm going to talk about updating customized ScandiPWA 2 to ScandiPWA 4 based on our experience with Kratky.com website. Okay, let's start off with saying a few words about Advox Studio. The agency was founded in 2010 in Poznań, Poland. From the very beginning, we decided to specialize in Magento. Right now, we have 40 Magento devs on board. In the past few years, we've also ventured into Symfony, React, and Salesforce development territories. We've been Magento partners since 2017. Last year, we partnered up with Scandi. We've worked for numerous customers from all over Europe. We've done websites in different industries like apparel, food, beauty. But I think that Kratky is one of the most exceptional customers that we've had to date. They're a leading European manufacturer of fireplaces, stoves, grills, and basically all the expensive and nice things you buy to make your garden or your house a cozy place. Kratky came to us in November 2020. It was a few weeks after they've premiered the first ScandiPWA website, of which they were not too happy. The initial conditions were that it was running Magento 2.3.5, inherited from another agency. It had ScandiPWA 2 from July 2020. It had 8 sole views, 8 languages, and a pretty basic ScandiPWA layout. Basic, at least in terms of how it looked and felt, not in how it worked, because it had a lot of business logic implemented on the front end due to the client's requirements. Kratky wanted us to make the website prettier, more stable, faster. So basically, we had to fix it and improve it drastically because the time was, the clock was ticking and the client wanted to have it done quickly. We knew we had to update both Magento and Scandi. We knew we had to implement a new design, and we knew we had to do it simultaneously, while also working on the production side to fix the errors that were popping up here and there. So it was a challenge, obviously. It was a challenge, and well, naturally we accepted it. So we had to devise a smart plan, and our plan consisted of 4 steps. The first step was creating a new theme, then moving existing components to the new template, finding and fixing errors, and adding or updating required plugins such as PayPal, Klarna, GTM, or what have you. So for creating a separate theme. Like I said, we needed to be able to fix a lot of things in the production while working on the updates. So we needed to have 2 templates running at the same time. We created the second template with Create ScandiPWA app, which is provided in the newer versions of Scandi. It's a great tool and it makes creating new theme a breeze, so we recommend it highly. And since we had updated Magento's backend before, we were able to create a separate test environments with updated Magento and connect it directly with front-end developers' local environments. So our front-end guys, they were able to work in line with QA team of the test environment and test all content or config-based elements in a much easier way. The second step was migrating existing components, and since the redesign was in progress, we created a sorted list of components. First, we singled out components that we knew we wouldn't have to modify or we would not modify with the new design, so we could move them to the new template at the very beginning. And then we had the second category of components. These were the components that we knew we would be fixing or redesigning, both on the old theme and in the new theme. And in the last 2 weeks of the whole process, we stopped developing all new features and we focused on migrating the freshly customized components to the old theme and then testing and so on. For the technical geeks, the most important message from this part is that we widely used the extension mechanism, which was implemented in ScandiPWA 4. It was a great way to migrate the old components to the new version. We've also noticed that some of the legacy components had been overridden in the source files, which made updating them much more difficult. So it shows how important it is actually sticking to the official documentation of ScandiPWA. Finding and fixing error was probably the longest part, since we decided to migrate components one by one instead of updating the whole website and then testing it as a whole. We had smaller parts of the website to test. Obviously, after we've moved one or two components, we tested the whole website on a separate environment progressively as a whole as well. But doing it one by one allowed us to actually be more precise with our testing. The main problem that we encountered during testing was that a lot of Scandi 2 era bugs had been fixed by the previous agency, but they were fixed directly in the source. So sometimes it was difficult what had been fixed by the previous agency and what actually has been fixed by Scandi itself in the new version. So basically, the golden rule for any future development is to always stick to the override mechanisms documentation from ScandiPWA, which is, well, quite extensive and quite comprehensible. So we highly recommend sticking to it. Some numbers. We created 77 Jira tasks connected to the update. We spent more or less 245 hours of the dev time updating both Magento and ScandiPWA. It doesn't include the time which was connected to the redesign or re-implementing the front end and how it looked. We also had 40 hours of manual QA. The team who implemented the update was consisted of 2 front-end devs and 2 back-end devs. And we must confess we had to push 2 releases with hot fixes after the update was pushed live because, well, nobody's perfect. But the end result, I think, is quite satisfying. The website is working in a much stable way and it looks much better. And if I had to leave you with some words of wisdom at the end, I would say, well, update often and it will be easier each time. Thank you very much.
Hello, Michal.
Hello, very sorry for being late.
Glad to see you anyhow. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. How are you?
Good. We saw your presentation. We have some questions for you.
Cool. I'm all ears.
All right. Let's kick off with this one. Throughout the whole process, what were the main challenges and how were they dealt with?
I think the main challenge was basically, since it was a legacy project, we obviously had to get used to, different practices and so on of the previous agency. And since they didn't adhere in every element to the Scandi documentation, especially in terms of extension mechanisms implemented in Scandi, we had to adapt to that and basically check every component for the elements that had been changed kind of incorrectly or not, correctly to the full spectrum. The other thing was that since, well, it was Scandi 2, it had some, native bugs which had been fixed by the other devs and then had been fixed by Scandi itself. So we had custom fixes and official fixes. So we had to differentiate between them two, and basically import the give precedence to the original fixes to have everything standardized as much as possible.
And it sounds pretty thorough. And what would be your suggestions for others embarking on a journey like yours? What would be the things that you wish you knew before doing this update yourself?
I mean, one thing is that definitely, just like I said at the end of the presentation, we should update as often as possible, because when you have more changes, it gets more difficult and time consuming. Obviously, if we could do it again, most probably, I think we would negotiate a bit harder in terms of stopping the redesign process, so we could focus, precisely on the update itself without having to update other views and so on. Because I think this was the most difficult part, that we had to both update it, how it looked and how it worked in terms of the updates. So I guess as an agency, it's definitely very difficult to negotiate some solutions with the customer to basically agree. I mean, for him to agree to stop development of new features on the front end for the time being, and then just focus on getting the update as quickly as possible, set up, and then doing the next steps.
Yeah, and actually regarding your final advice, could you elaborate a bit more on it? What processes get better, easier, or streamlined if the updates are done often?
Well, I mean, because I assume that if you're an agency and if you're a customer and you've invested into PWA and so on, you develop your e-commerce like constantly. You change things as much as possible, as often as you can, and so on. Well, of course, as much as your budget allows, but basically, you want your store to improve, so you change a lot. And then, obviously, I mean, if everything is done like 100% adhering to Scandi documentations with extensions and so on, then updates should be like a breeze. But in the real world, sometimes you have to do some things in a faster way. Sometimes you have to compromise some quality, some solutions and so on, just to meet the deadline and so on. I mean, that's the reality, right, of development. So and since every update changes a lot, there's always a possibility of some conflict between your custom solutions and the original ScandiPWA code occurring. So basically, to minimize the chances of that happening, I'd say that because there's a lot of changes between each Scandi update, but they're not that massive that every time it would take 50, 60, 70, 80 hours or so to update. The cost is not that great if you do it often. In our case, it was, like I said, over 200 hours because it was ScandiPWA 2 with some legacy code and so on. So the cost was quite big. But if you do it constantly, the changes are not that tedious. So I guess you wouldn't, as a client, you wouldn't feel it as a big budget, burden.
Yeah, well, there are some understandable benefits for the customers, but for you internally, how do you cope with the change fatigue? And does it get easier if you implement it as a process that's just at the core of your company to update all of that?
If you could rephrase the question, because
how do you cope with the change fatigue if you do the changes and updates frequently?
I mean, well, c'est la vie, right? As a developer, you just need to do some things because, obviously, with releases and so on, there's some additional stress. But at the same time, it's important for me as a project manager to explain to my team that we're doing this basically to make the customer happier and actually make our life easier. Because you can either especially if there are some bugs or some missing features, especially. I mean, Scandi has covered Magento quite extensively, but still there are some nice, native Magento features which are being added to the new versions of ScandiPWA, right? So sometimes there's the choice between waiting for, I don't know, like, the quick add to shop button on the listing, which you are about to add to the newest Scandi, right? So there's a choice between, you can do it as a custom addition to ScandiPWA, so you have to do it from scratch, or you can just wait for the update and then do it yourself. So even if the team is kind of fatigued with the stress, connected with updates, then obviously you need to communicate it to them that we're doing it to make your and our life easier, because, well, if Scandi adds more things and fixes some other problems and so basically improves the product, working with Scandi is going to be, well, more pleasant with time. So, and to be honest, I think that dev teams really don't like big updates. You can update every 3 months or 4 months, but then the amount of things you have to check, to retest and so on, I think that's even more stressful than when the pressure is kind of, equal in weeks throughout the month.
The last question coming from the audience is that as a Magento developer, I have no knowledge of Scandi. What should be my starting point?
Oh, well, obviously reading documentation, and because I was even thinking to myself before the presentation, should I say that, for example, you need to have some Magento experience to work with Scandi? So for the front-end guy, you don't have to. Like half of the team that worked with the update, they didn't have previous Magento experience. They just knew React well. So that's important. You need to know React. You really need to have some solid fundamentals in React to be able to work with Scandi fluently. This is kind of obvious, but then again, if you think that something's wrong with Scandi, let's go and check your React credentials if they're strong enough. If they are, just focus on Scandi documentation. Obviously, look for, if you have some lacking knowledge in Dockers and so on, you can have. I would recommend for you to check it as well. But in the overall, I think, it's kind of the same with Magento itself. Documentation is the Bible. You cannot ignore it. You cannot complain on some difficulties, obstacles, and so on if you haven't thoroughly read the documentation. You don't have to know it by heart, but you need to understand and respect it.
Gotcha. Well, that's it for the questions from me. It appears that's it from the audience as well. And in that case, on that note, I would like to thank you for your presentation and for joining the live Q&A session. It was really nice to have you on the stage and hear these thorough answers of yours.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.